Here we go. Here we go. We supposedly are beginning live. Welcome to Wednesday Night Live, Primetime Aquatics. Glad you're here. Thank you so much for being here, taking a little bit of time out of your week on a lovely Wednesday evening or morning or afternoon, depending on where you are in the world, to come hang out with the coolest fish keepers on the face of the earth. That's you. You're the best ever. Thank you so much for being here. You're going to notice, for the first time ever, I'm by myself. Joanna's not here. She had some family things to deal with tonight, so she is most likely going to be gone for the evening, so you just get stuck with me, unfortunately. So hopefully we'll be okay. We'll make a run of it, and it won't be too disappointing without Joanna being here. She'll be back next week. So that's the story here. So it'll be a little bit different with just me, and I hope you can deal with it. Again, thank you so much for being here. Hope everybody's having a great week. We are getting close to a whole bunch of stuff, so I want to just talk about what's coming up and what's going on before we get into tonight's topic tonight. I'm really excited because we're going to be talking about, and actually, strangely enough, this wasn't even my idea. Joanna wanted to talk about some cleaning tips. She had all kinds of tips that she wanted to share. I don't know what those tips were because she took her little book of ideas with her. If some of you know, we have our little book of ideas, and that's what we use for videos and when you guys come up with cool stuff. So I have my own cleaning tips, and I just hope they're going to be as good and useful as hers were. So a couple things. Monday on Primetime Aquatics, we did a video. Joanna rescaped, we say like 3.5 tanks on the 40-gallon breeder wall. Made a lot of tanks look better, I think. So if you haven't checked that out and you are into, hey, I like it when tanks look marginal and then they get better, that would be a video to check out. Joanna did a video today where she highlighted the last tank over here, and she talked about what's in there and the scaping and stuff, although it wasn't quite the same as what we've done with the other 3 tanks where we kind of show the scape itself. And the reason for that is because of me. I lost all the footage. In fact, it wasn't that I lost it, I deleted it. So I had the camera thing, and as I was going through, we were running out of space on one of our memory cards. I'm like, oh, we've already done all this. Let me go ahead and delete all the footage that we don't need anymore. And I deleted all the footage of the aquascape as she was aquascaping it for tank number 4 over there. So she came through and did a video today, highlighted that tank, did a little bit more of a close-up, and then also went over the other 3 tanks and some small changes that she's made so far. So if you haven't seen that on the Smallscape, the other channel that we have, might be worth checking out. Tomorrow we will do our members only video, so we'll be down in the fish room. For those of you who are wondering what those videos look like, usually it's more of like a vloggy style thing, because I mean we do a lot of education on this channel, and so I try to make it more personal, more vloggy with information built in, so I'm not just wasting somebody's time for 5 to 10 minutes. So that's tomorrow. Friday, I've got a species profile coming out that is going to be, I hope you find pretty interesting. And then of course, Joanna on the Smallscape again will have something hopefully wonderful for you as well. So that's what's coming up on the video side. And then where we're going to be, a couple things this Sunday. And I know I've mentioned this a couple times, but if you are in the Midwest, like southern Wisconsin, northern, actually pretty much all of Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, we've even seen people come from Missouri, the Greater Chicago Cichlid Association, and by the way, I put links in up towards the upper end of the chat, the GCCA, gcca.net, they are going to be doing their rare fish auction this Sunday. What's cool, you can already see the fish that are going to be there. If you go to gcca.net, they have like a PowerPoint presentation. There's well over 100 bags of fish. The vast majority of them are on the rarer side. I've got my eye on a couple already. You have to be a member. So you have to be a member to bid on fish at the rare fish auction. But it's like $25 for a year. I promise you, you're going to save more than that on the first bag of fish you buy, because the rare fish that they sell are going to be most likely under the retail price that you would pay by a fairly large margin. So we're going to be there Sunday. That's Sunday evening, this Sunday. And then we have Aquasella coming up next week. So that's Saturday and Sunday next week. So what is that, like the 14th and the 15th, I think, something like that. So I should really know those dates by now. I think what is the 4th? So yeah, I think it's the 14th and 15th. Couple things there. So I've mentioned this before, but if you're planning to go, if you haven't gotten tickets yet, I highly recommend doing that. They let the VIPs in at, I believe, 9 o'clock. No, 10 o'clock. I think it's 10. And then there's the early bird special where they come in at like 11, and then general admission is like 12 or 1. It's a little bit different depending on the day because the Sunday schedule is more condensed. If you are planning to go and wanted to see my talk that I'm giving, that's going to be Sunday at noon. There are some other things we'll be doing there as well. We're going to have live streaming going on. I'll be part of those. It's going to be a lot of fun. There's more stuff going on in Chicago than even there was in Orlando. So it's going to be exciting to roll out some new things. So hopefully we'll see you there. If not, if you want to hear a talk that by me and you can't make it to Aquasella, then I will be giving a talk again at the GCCA on September the 12th. It's a Sunday. That you don't need to be a member to show up to that. Usually you can come to a meeting or two without being a member and they're just like, oh, welcome, it's cool. There's some other interesting things that might be going on that night as well that we're still working on, but I will be doing a talk on the 12th at the GCCA, so if you want to see that and you can't make it to Aquasella, there's another opportunity. And then of course we have the GCCA swap that's coming up on September the 26th. So for those of you who are like, man, I sure would like to get some of those shell dwellers, or I'd love to get those cyprichromis, what we'll do is what we did last time. It worked out really well so people aren't wasting a trip and then getting there, because what's happened in the past is people come all the way like, oh, I really want some Maltese, I want some Similis, I want whatever. And then they get there and I'm already sold out, which usually I sell out of the shell dwellers pretty quickly. So what we'll do, if you're interested in going to the GCCA swap, fish swap on the 26th of September, is sometime the week before that swap, we will put fish up on our website for pre-order so that you can guarantee that when you show up to potentially purchase fish that you've seen on the channel, they're actually going to be in your hands and not like, oh my gosh, they sold out already, because I feel bad when that happens. So that's what's going on as we look towards the next month or so. So it's fun because, as some of you know, this is the time of year, if you're really into fish, where a lot of the things start to happen, a lot more of the shows and the swaps and the club meetings and all that. So it's an exciting time. Now, again, tonight, we are talking about fish tank cleaning tips that are going to make fish tank cleaning a lot easier and hopefully a lot faster, a lot less stressful, because for the most part, I think most people love to look at their fish. They love to look at their tanks. Maybe they like to decorate them, aquascape them. But let's face it, when it comes to cleaning tanks, that might be somewhat amusing for the first couple months. You have a tank like, yes, I'm going to maintain my fish tanks. But ultimately what winds up happening is life. You know that thing that we're living right now called life? It happens. And when we're living life, life tends to get in the way of other things that we're doing in our life. And the next thing you know, like, I've got this family event. I've got this place to go. I'm going to be on vacation for a week. I've got all these things to do. Work is getting really busy. And the fish tank sits there in the corner. You're like, uh-oh, this is not really fitting into my busy schedule at this season in my life for the next 6 months or a year. And so what I'd like to do today is offer you some tips that we've learned, because as most of you know who are watching this channel or watching this live stream, right now, I think I counted the other day, because people ask me, like, how many fish tanks do you have up and running? And I always say between 70 and 80. And that's a really good estimate. And then I think I counted 74. So we have 74 tanks up and running right now. And as I've mentioned before, I don't do the fish tank maintenance in the tanks in the fish room. Those are done by my two sons, but they have implemented the tips that I'm going to go over today, and it makes cleaning tanks a lot easier. We have to be efficient. If we're not efficient in maintaining 74 fish tanks, and we don't have auto water change, so these are going to be tips that are practical, aren't going to cost you a bunch of money, and aren't going to cost you a bunch of technical expertise. We're like, what do we mean? I've got to drill tanks and run water and a drip system and an overflow and all that. Those things are great. And at some point I very well may do them, but that's not quite where we're going with this. We want to have more practical, easier tips that are going to make life a lot easier for you long term. So Thing number one, before I even get started, if you want more information about tank maintenance, check out the description below. We've done videos on how to clean tanks, how to be more efficient. So there's a bunch of videos down in the description below if you want to see those. But I think one of the first things, and it's something that sometimes gets overlooked. And what gets overlooked, we've talked about it before, is gravel vacuuming your tank. Well, how is this going to speed things up or make things easier? It just sounds like more work. It kind of, sort of is, but we're looking long term, right? And so all the tips that I'm giving you, I'm thinking not just about the time that you're going to spend on a tank or 10 tanks or however many tanks you have at that particular moment in time. It's like, what are you doing now that's going to make your life easier next week, next month, next year, so that when we add up all the time we spend maintaining a tank, that we can minimize it. So while, yes, it would be a faster experience if you just chuck a siphon in there and drain 25% of your water and just fill it back up again. It's like, well, I didn't gravel vac, I didn't do any of that stuff. It was really quick. That was easy. It was the first time you did it. It probably will be the 5th time you do it, maybe the 10th time. But by the time you get to tank cleaning number 20, it's like, this tank is not looking so great. One of the things that you can do, keeping the long-term perspective in mind, is gravel vacuuming your fish tank, especially if you don't have live plants. There's a couple reasons for that. Reason number one is when fish food, uneaten fish food, and fish waste get into that substrate, those are nutrients. Those are nutrients for other microbes to use. And when those microbes use those nutrients, sometimes that contributes to higher nitrate levels. We want to try to minimize nitrate. Talk about that more in a second. But when we gravel vac, we take that fish waste out. And so you can do 25%, 50% water changes. But if you're not gravel vacuuming and removing that waste, especially in unplanted tanks, you can still have high nitrates. You could still eventually have water that's a little bit more cloudy, especially if you've got fish that are going to dig a little bit or freak out a little bit near the substrate. So for instance, I'm thinking of like a bristlenose pleco. Bristlenose plecos are cool. They do a great job in our fish room of keeping tanks relatively algae free. The problem is sometimes they like to scooch under rocks. Sometimes they like to get excited when it's time to eat, and their little tails go back and forth really, really fast. And then the next thing you know, everything is stirred up in the fish tank and you got stuff floating around everywhere. When you gravel vac, that reduces that kind of thing from happening. It can reduce your nitrates because you don't have all those nutrients in the tank. The other thing that gravel vacuuming will do that will speed up your fish tank maintenance is it will reduce the amount of food available to algae. Now, let's face it, some of us like myself, I don't mind algae unless it's on the front of the glass. If it's on the front of the glass, then I mind it because I can't see my fish. It doesn't look great. If it's on the back, if it's on the sides, whatever. I don't really care. If it's growing on some of the decorations, on the wood, on the rocks, well, okay. It doesn't bother me. For some of you, you hate it. You hate algae. That's okay. But then one of the ways to control algae, especially in non-planted tanks, is to gravel vac, remove those nutrients that the algae would normally use to grow. So gravel vacuuming could be a really good thing. The other thing to consider if you want to talk about, okay, how am I going to speed this process up because I'm not enjoying the whole fish tank cleaning thing? Get rid of buckets. Just put the water right on the floor. It'll dry eventually. No, don't do that. Don't do that. That's a second thought. That's a bad idea. Don't put water on the floor. Anybody ever done that? Anybody ever done something like, oh, I've got a siphon in a bucket and then forget about it? Or you're filling a tank and you walk away because you've got like a little thing and I'm just filling, and all of a sudden you get a phone call or something, oh, there's a squirrel, look at that. You get distracted for a minute, next thing you know, you hear water running, like, what's that noise? Oh my gosh, I was filling a tank. So one of the things that can save a lot of time is, and I saw somebody mention it earlier in the chat, the Python systems. And so what these do, usually if you Google, okay, Python fish tank cleaning system, Aquarium makes one that I think is perfectly adequate as well, a little bit cheaper. Basically what they do is you have a piece that screws into a sink. Right, so you take the little piece off, the aerator piece, you screw the Python system in, it's got a flow through, and it usually has like a 50-foot long hose. And what's nice about that is you can hook that up to a gravel vac and you can go through, and generally speaking what you do is you just start the sink, the water runs, and if the gravel vac is in the tank, it creates suction so that it pulls the water through the hose and eventually empties into the sink. The mistake a lot of people make is as long as your tank is higher than the sink, you don't need to keep running the water in your sink. And so people will be like, this is great. I think I just wasted 6,000 gallons of water making this Python system run and suck water out of my tank. Not necessary, because as soon as the suction starts, again, as long as you've got tank higher than sink, you can turn off the water in the sink and just let the tank drain. If that's not a possibility, let's say you're like, okay, you know what, the tank is closer to the floor, or it's not going to work because of the whole gravity thing situation. What we used to do that worked out very well is we would get a 5-gallon bucket. You could also do this with a tote and carry it back and forth. No, I'm just kidding. We don't want to do that. Remember, we're trying to get away from it. Simple, quick, and easy. Get yourself a 5-gallon bucket. Now, this is going to vary a little bit depending on the type of fish tank you have, the volume, the size of the gravel vac that you're using or the hose that you're using to drain. But you put a pond pump in that bucket, and then you run a hose to a floor drain, to a bathtub, to a sink. And what's going to happen is you're going to drain water from the tank into the bucket, and the pump is going to pump that water out of the bucket and into wherever you've placed the hose. That's going to save you from carrying buckets back and forth. The more tanks you have, maybe now you consider, okay, I'm not going to do this in a bucket. Maybe I'm going to do this in a 30-gallon garbage can with wheels. And now I can get a larger pump, and it's going to go ahead and push that water right out of that big container and into some type of a floor drain. And then maybe what you're doing then is you're emptying multiple tanks at the same time if you've got a large enough pump. The pump size is going to depend on how fast the water is going into the 5-gallon bucket. And so what I would often do is I say, okay, how many tanks do I want to drain into the bucket at once? How quickly is that 5-gallon bucket getting full? So in other words, gallons per hour. Do that math real quick and then figure out, okay, I want a pump that's going to at least cover that or maybe go higher than that to make sure I don't have to keep stopping. Like, oh, the bucket's getting full. Let me break suction on one of the tanks and then restart it again. So that's one way to deal with it, right? And it does save a lot of time. It's going to make life so much easier for you, and it really is something to consider, especially if the Python system's not working. Now, the other thing that you want to do is like, okay, that's great for getting water out. How do I get water back in? There again, you can, the Python or the Aquarium systems where it just screws right into the sink. Now it doesn't really matter the whole where the tank is relative to the sink, because you're going to have water pressure coming out of the sink that's going to feed the fresh water right back into your tank. The nice thing is, if you're using a kitchen sink or a bathroom sink or a bathtub, you can control the temperature, right? So you just want to make sure you match the temperature of the water that's coming out of the faucet to the tank temperature. I'm not super high tech with that. It's like, I have this thing here. It's a finger. My finger has feelings. Nerve endings, stinking nerve endings. And I just feel the water that's coming out of the hose. Okay, or actually I would feel the water as it's coming through the bypass. Like, okay, that's about the same as a tank. In it goes. A lot of people ask, well, what about the dechlorinator? Do you put it in before? Do you put it in after? It's fine. Either way is fine. I generally, because we're cleaning so many tanks, what the boys will often do is like, okay, it's time to fill. I'm filling these 6 tanks. All 6 of them get their little dechlorinator. We use a powder. Use whatever you want. And then they start filling. And so that's generally how that's done. It will save you a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of back pain. Let's face it, when you're carrying buckets, the worst thing is when you accidentally fill the bucket up too much. It's like, I have nowhere to put this. It's heavy. And now I've got to try to keep my carpet clean or water off the hardwood floors. You're trying to carry it real carefully. And it seems like the more careful you are with carrying the bucket, the more water winds up on the floor. Not cool. Not cool at all. So those systems work really well. We actually built our own system that consisted of, we just went to Lowe's and I bought a piece that screws into the sink and a little plastic PVC piece with a valve. I can either turn it on so the water passes through, or I can turn it and the water will bypass. It's like a valve that's got a little extension. I put a hose on there. When I turn it, it goes through the hose. And then I just bought PVC that kind of made a J shape hanging onto the side of the tank. I did silicone the little pieces. And at some point, I'll just do a video because I know you're probably like, what the heck is he talking about? Literally takes maybe 10 minutes. A little bit of silicone, a little bit of plumber's tape, done. So that's how we get the water into and out of the tank. The other thing to consider, again, long term, don't ignore your algae. Here's what often happens. Let's just say you're busy and you have algae on the viewing pane. Maybe you're just one of those people like me. It's like, I just don't want it on the viewing pane. Fine, you leave it for a week or two. And you think, you know what, I'll just deal with it week 3, 4, or 5. Often what happens is by not dealing with it when you first notice it and you wait, it doesn't take twice as long because you waited twice as long. It takes like 3 or 4 times longer because now that algae, sometimes it's the hard green stuff and you're scraping away and it's not coming off, or maybe you're getting that red algae and that stuff is really, it can be hard to remove. So there are certain types of algae that are a little bit harder to remove than others. My best advice, again, we're thinking long term, right? We're not just thinking about the one cleaning event, is when you see algae that you find objectionable, deal with it right when you see it. Don't leave it, because the longer you leave it, the bigger the mess it's going to make, and it's going to be exponentially worse for you and your algae removal needs later on. So it's just something to consider. The other thing too is which can save you a lot of time. A lot of people ask, well, when do you do water changes? And again, we've talked about when we do water changes. If you were to Google Primetime Aquatics water change, you would see my water changing 101 video pop up. And the point that I made there is we use nitrate concentrations to determine how much water needs to be changed in a fish tank and how often. That is our gauge. The idea being, let's say you've got 2 20-gallon tanks. One of them's planted, one of them isn't planted. One of them is planted and very lightly stocked. One of them's not planted and you're breeding guppies in there and it's like, oh my gosh, I'm starting to get a lot of guppies. Well, it's the same volume. The stocking on the guppy tank is a little bit higher and there's no plants. Let's say you go a week, normal feeding. What could very likely happen is in that lightly stocked planted tank, that 20-gallon, after a week you might only have 10 parts per million in nitrate, where in that overstocked guppy tank with no plants, it might be kicking in 30 or 35 parts per million. Well, guess what that tells me? I'm going to let the planted tank go another week. I don't have to clean this thing every week, or I can do a very, very small water change to rebuild some of those minerals and stuff so the plants might like them. But in that guppy tank at 35 parts per million, I need to change enough water, ideally, so that the next time I do a water change at the peak, we're at 20, maybe 25 parts per million on my nitrate. So that's what I'm trying to dial in. What I always tell people when it comes to water testing is, and we've talked about this before in previous live streams, I don't test our tanks very often unless there's a big change in bioload or unless I'm having an issue, fish health or the way the tank is looking, too much algae. Then I might test it like, okay, are we doing what's right in terms of keeping nitrates in check? But other than that, I don't test, because I will test early on to determine, okay, if I do in that 20-gallon example with the guppies, if I know a 50% water change once a week is going to get me down to about, I don't know, let's just say 10 parts per million after the water change, and it never really goes much above 20 or 25 parts per million, I'm good. That's all I need to know. And as long as that bioload's not changing, as long as nothing's happening, I know 50% once a week is fine. I also know that I could just cut that down to 25% water changes twice a week. That's fine too. I'm of the opinion that smaller, more frequent water changes, if it's possible, are probably a little bit better than larger individual water changes if you're not trying to breed or do any specialty breeding or anything like that, because you're having less of an impact on the ecosystem. So the way we would look at it is your measurable parameters, your pH, your KH, your GH, temperature, all that stuff. If you're doing smaller water changes, you're getting fluctuations that kind of go like this. They're very, very minimal. If you're doing large water changes, your fluctuations in, of course, nitrates, maybe pH, but not necessarily, especially if you have harder water with a higher KH, you might be doing something a little bit more intense, right? And we want to try to keep the water parameters as stable as possible for our fish. So we're using nitrate. That's going to save us time because now we know How much water do I need to change and how often? If you're somebody who's like, my schedule dictates that I can change water on Saturday mornings and that's it. Or maybe you're like, you know what? I can change water on Wednesday evenings at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time because that's when my live stream happens and I want to hang out with the coolest people on the face of the earth, that being the people here watching. Then you know, okay, maybe I've got to do a 25% water change every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time, and that's going to be sufficient. But nitrates are your guide to helping you figure that out. Now you could, as I already kind of alluded to, and this does go along with tank maintenance, there are ways to lower nitrates so that, again, you are spacing those water changes out or you're doing less volume. So if you add live plants, so in my example where I had that lightly stocked planted tank, that 20 gallon, it only had, I think I said 10 to 15 parts per million. Okay, I can let it go an extra week. Or maybe I do a small 10% water change. I just empty out a couple gallons real fast and just keep doing that because I want to add some of the minerals back in. You could do that. But the plants are going to give you, they're going to consume some of those nitrates so that you don't have to do it so often. Maybe you have a tank where you can't really do live plants in the water, but maybe you can grow pothos out the back so the roots grow in the tank. The pothos leaves and stems grow out of the tank. That stuff does a pretty decent job of lowering nitrates as well. The other thing to consider, again, and this doesn't necessarily on the surface tie into fish tank maintenance, but it's really important, and that is, what is your lighting schedule? We've talked about this a lot, both in videos and in live streams. We leave our lights on for 9 hours a day. It's 2.5 hours in the morning, 6.5 hours at night. We find that the way that we do that, it grows all of the low to medium light plants that we have in our fish room, so we don't have any issues there. But the reason that's going to help you with your tank maintenance is if you leave your lights on too long, guess what? Now you're getting more algae growth, which is going to take you longer to maintain. Maybe you're starting to have green water issues, and that can be a pain, or just cloudy water in general. So you want to make sure that your lights are on long enough if you've got plants so that they grow well, but not so long where you're like, oh my gosh, this looks not so great. Another little tip for you that could save you time in the long run. Have you ever done a water change, cleaned your tank, and you're like, you know, I don't know what's going on lately, but this still doesn't look all that great. We have that happen in our fish room. And one of the reasons that often happens has nothing to do with the water, has nothing to do with the tank itself. It's the lids. If you have lids on your tank, and let's say, especially for us, because we got sponge filters, so they're bubbling, and that water is hitting the lid, guess what's happening? We get algae growth on the underside of the lid. We get hard water stains on the top side, and all of that stuff starts to dim the lights. It just makes the tank look less than ideal sometimes. So pay attention to your lids, your glass lids, plastic lids, whatever you're using. If it's a lid where the light is going to rest on top somehow and the light is being blocked, it can make your tank look less than ideal. So just kind of keep that in mind. Another thing to consider is your filter media. So we've done a lot of videos on this, on how we maintain our filters, sponge filters in particular. We maintenance our filters every single week. So when we do our water changes on every tank is also having filter maintenance done. Part of the reason for that is on the vast majority of the 74 tanks that we have up and running, they run exclusively on sponge filters. So we're relying on those sponge filters, not just for the to a certain extent on the biological filtration, even though the rest of the tank is kind of serving that purpose as well. But especially, they're our only source of mechanical filtration. And if a sponge filter gets clogged up, which they do fairly quickly, especially in a moderately to heavily stocked tank, those things need to be rinsed. And so we do that every single week. Filter floss, especially, because that's one of the best things that you can use to trap particulate matter in your fish tank. So in the few tanks that we have, hang-on back filters are like the tanks behind us where it's an all-in-one. There's filter floss in there. We're checking that stuff every single week. For us, most of the time, the filter floss is being exchanged every single week. New filter floss. The sponges, because we'll use either coarse or fine sponge in those filters, they're usually getting a quick rinse in the sink. Yes, we've done videos on the science behind why that doesn't matter if you're using chlorinated tap water. But we're rinsing those things off. We're changing out the filter media. that makes a huge, huge difference. You will know that the best way you'll know if your filter media needs to be maintenance, whether that's floss, whether that's a sponge, whether it's canister, is when you look at the water and the water looks not so good, right? It looks fine. You do your water change. You're like, okay, this looks pretty decent. And then within a day or two, you're like, what happened? If you haven't maintained your filter recently, and again, the only thing we do for the maintenance part is the media, right? I am not washing the inside of that filter. In fact, I want the actual filter compartment to be housed with bacteria. It's like it gets real slimy. That's a great thing. The intake tubes, we don't touch them unless they're clogged, which very rarely ever happens. Those get all slimy, especially on the inside. That's a great thing. That's your beneficial microbes that are doing the whole nitrification process, but we are changing out the filter media. That can make or break a tank. And the other thing that you'll often see if your filter media hasn't been maintained in a while, you'll start to see the biofilms form on your glass in your fish tank, on the fronts, on the sides. Not necessarily algae, but just a biofilm. So if you see that biofilm starting to form, you're like, what is going on? I just scraped this stupid glass like 2 days ago and it's back already. Water's not looking great. The nitrates are okay, but it's because your filter media is due to be changed. So for floss, if it's looking brown, out it goes. If we pull it out, like, okay, there's still a significant amount of the original color, whether that's white, if it's just, store-bought bulk filter floss, or you're using like the blue bonded stuff, like, okay, I can still see the blue color, fine, leave it in, let it go another week, check it again next week. But if it's mostly brown, out it goes. So last thing, and then we'll get into questions, because I'm sure I'm seeing stuff pop up here, and that is for ease and to make sure that you're having the best possible time cleaning your tanks. Make sure the equipment that you're using matches the tank that you're using it on. And so this is especially important with gravel vacs, and I'm a big fan of gravel vacs. Even if I'm not necessarily, even if I got a planted tank and I'm not going into the substrate, I still like to take the gravel vac. We've done videos on how to maintain fish tanks with sand, and we'll kind of hover the gravel vac over the surface and swirl it around like this, and then it kind of stirs up whatever's on the surface of the sand, and that gets sucked up. But make sure that gravel vac matches the size of the tank. The last thing you'd want, like we've got some really big gravel vacs that clean the 150 and the 125s. Sometimes the boys will try to use those things to do a 10-gallon. Well, you don't get really good suction doing that, and they're really hard to maneuver, those big gravel vacs in those small tanks. Likewise, it would be really difficult if we had the 150, which is a 4-foot 150 that's 30 inches tall. If you only got a 12-inch gravel vac, how are you going to get the ability to really get that gravel vac into the substrate without getting your whole arm wet? And let's face it, unless you are an extreme fish keeper, not many people like wet armpits, especially if you're wearing a shirt and you get the water in your wet armpit shirt and you're in the middle of cleaning tanks. You got to make sure you don't overflow anything, and now you got wet armpits for the rest of the time. What's even worse, let me know if this has ever happened to you. Wet armpits plus duckweed snuck in. And now you've got wet armpits and duckweed in your shirt, in your armpits. That's not an easy situation to deal with. Make sure your equipment is sized correctly, and that won't be a problem. Okay, so those are some tips that I have. I will take questions. I'll go ahead and go through the chat here. I saw a couple things roll in that I want to recognize. Michelle, thank you so much for the sticker. Crocodiles. I've never seen the crocodiles before. Thank you. Appreciate it. Coventry, thank you so much for the super chat. Really appreciate it. This is the bomb information. I have been trying to figure out how to get tank water to my garden. This is a great way. Back in the old days, I still think about this and I laugh. We didn't have that many tanks when we first moved here back in the 00s, and then when the boys were young, we didn't have a lot going on. Maybe we had 4 or 5, and they were all next to the window in our basement. And what we would do is we didn't have the bucket thing set up yet. We did have the hose, but that hose ran all the way upstairs from the kitchen all the way down the stairs in the basement into the tanks because it was like a big, long 50-foot hose. This was hilarious. So what we would do is we would drain the tanks, but we basically opened the window to the basement and drained the tanks out the window and into, I guess at that point it went into a window well that had a drain. This is really weird now that I think about it. It went in a window well that had a drain where that water was probably just going along the foundation back into the sump, because then the sump would turn on more often and then that would go out into the yard. And I think the grass was like loving that. So in your situation, what would be a lot cooler is if you did the pond pump thing with a long hose. And by the way, some of those pond pumps will have a garden hose attachment. Run that right out the door, run it out a window, right into your garden. Boom. Now you don't have to carry buckets and plus your plants will absolutely love that water. It's guaranteed. The other funny thing now that I think about it, when we used to do those water changes, wow, I haven't thought about this in a while. We used to have to hold the hose, and then somebody would be upstairs in the sink in the faucet. We didn't have anything that was like we couldn't turn it on and off, or maybe we could. I don't remember. Yeah, we could turn. We still had a valve, but we used to have to say okay, because we had to tell somebody, okay, it's time to turn it off, time to turn it on, because we didn't have the valve right next to the thing like we do now. So the person by the sink was the one that was responsible for actually turning the water on and off. So we'd be like, okay, and they would turn it off. Okay, then they would know we were at the next tank to turn it on. And every once in a while, you get a little worried because you'd be down there, you'd be like, okay, and you wouldn't get a response, and the water wasn't shutting off. You're like, all right, shut it off, and the water would be getting closer and closer because somebody upstairs, a child at that time who was very young. I mean, the boys have been helping in the fish room since they were extremely small, and I can remember at one point, Eli must have been, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old. And he was in charge of turning the water on and off upstairs. And I look back at that now, I'm like, he did a good job most of the time. Like, I put a lot of trust in a 4-year-old to turn that water on and off. Because if you didn't turn it off, like if he just got, oh, look, there's Woody Woodpecker, I'm going to go watch that. I'm down there screaming, all right, turn it off. That's a long run upstairs. There would have been water on the floor. And that's never a good thing. So, cool. Long story short, I'm glad that you figured out a way to get water to your garden, because that's important. All right, let's see here. What kind of questions do we have again? If you have questions, the easiest way for me to see it is if you put the @Primetime Aquatics. It shows up in orange on my end, and then I know immediately there is a question there that you want answered. So Daisy M, you mentioned sponge filters. I've seen some people don't have the lift tube on their sponge filter. Is there any reason or advantage to that? That's a great question. You'll even notice in our fish room, in some of the tanks, we have the lift tubes connected, and in some we don't. There's a couple reasons why we will not connect them. Some fish will decide they want to swim in there. Sometimes when they do that, it's fine. They can get back out. But we have found that in some cases, this was the weirdest thing, but back when we had, gosh, what fish was that? I don't remember. We were quarantining some cichlid. It might have been the Midas cichlids. When we got them really early on, it just seemed like they would go in there, get themselves stuck, and then they would die. And that happened like 3 days in a row. I'm like, oh, luckily we had like 10 of them, but I'm like, this is crazy. Why do they keep swimming in there and dying? Like, you'd think they would see the one, be like, oh, that was a bad idea. He's not getting out of there. I'm not going to do that. Nope. Like 3 days in a row. So we took the uplift tube out. Bristlenose plecos are notorious for going in there. A lot of times they can get themselves out, but we've had our share of bristlenose plecos get themselves stuck. Mystery snails have gotten themselves stuck in there to the point where it's like, okay, they didn't make it. And when mystery snails die, it's horrible, especially when they get themselves stuck in an intake tube and they're blowing, and the thing is blowing like dead mystery snail everywhere. That's not good. So you'll see people take them off because they don't want to run the risk of having their fish get stuck in those uplift tubes. The other reason is sometimes the sponge filter plus the uplift tube is just too long. So that can be especially a problem on your shorter tanks like your 20 longs, because a lot of times with a 20 long, you're like, okay, I want to use a sponge filter like maybe like an ATI Hydro 3 or 2, but they're longer. Then you add the uplift tube, and by the time you do that, there's very little space for the bubbles to come out before it hits the surface, and so sometimes that will cause a lot of extra bubbling, and if the lid around that area is not completely tightly sealed, or you've got that gap, now water's going everywhere. So those are a couple reasons why you might not want them. Short of that, I generally do have them on my tanks because the purpose that they serve is the longer those uplift tubes are, the better the suction is going to be through the filter. The extreme example would be your under gravel filters. So if you have ever seen those from back, they were really popular back in the late 80s into the 90s, even the early 00s. You have the big long uplift tubes with the elbow at the top, and that would be what you have for filtration. Basically what that was doing is it was creating water flow that would go through the substrate and then under that under gravel filter plate and then back up through the uplift tubes and around. The longer those uplift tubes were, the more suction you would get in that entire system. So that's why you would want to keep them. So my recommendation is, if you can use them, use them. If you're worried about certain fish or snails getting stuck in there, if you get rid of them, just know that maybe you're going to get a little bit less suction. But look at our tanks. In the tanks that don't have them, it's not like they're completely horrible and they don't function. They don't function as well, to be sure, but they're still going to accomplish certainly biological filtration. They're just not going to be as good at the mechanical side of sucking stuff out of the water column. So hopefully that answers the question. Tesla Killdozer, thank you so much for the super chat. Really appreciate it, Jason. I'm really enjoying the stream tonight. I'm going to give you one of the oddball super chats that I give Steenfot and KG Aquatics. Love your channel and videos. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the oddball super chat. Glad you're here. Glad you're enjoying it. All right, let's see here. All right, now you guys got to know my eyes. So what? Illville? Hopefully I'm saying that right. For me, my eyes, sometimes the I's and the L's all kind of run together. But thank you. Really appreciate the super chat. I just moved to Washington, D.C., and I noticed the tap water is very hard, but with low KH. What do you suggest? I'm very scared of water changes because of drastic pH swings due to low KH. That's a great question. And yeah, you've put some serious thought into that. So, okay, a couple things. You've got very hard water, which means that your general hardness, I'm assuming by saying that your general hardness is high, but your KH is low. So for those of you who don't know, there is a couple different measurements when it comes to water parameters and how all these fill out. And we've done videos on this stuff before. There are really two things that are tied together. So you've got your GH, general hardness, your KH, which is your carbonate hardness, and then your pH, which is a measure of your, basically your hydroxyl ions and your hydrogen ions and the concentration. The way that's all linked together is your KH is actually the buffering capacity of your water. How much will your water change in pH based on external factors like doing water changes, putting driftwood in your fish tank? Your KH is a measurement of how stable your pH is going to be. Usually, if your KH is high, most of the time your pH is also going to be high. That doesn't mean you can't have a high pH with a lower KH, and in this case, that's what you have. So there's a couple things you can do with this. One, going back to what we talked about with the fish tank maintenance side of things, you can do more frequent, smaller water changes. So don't let fish waste build up in your tank. Maybe you're not going a full week. Be careful with driftwood, right? So this is a case where, and I did a video about, does driftwood alter the pH of your aquarium? It does not in our fish tanks. And we've had lots of comments like, you put that giant piece of driftwood in your tank, you're going to crash your pH and kill your fish. My response is, we've done it a million times. It's never impacted our pH. It's not going to kill our fish. It doesn't do anything to our pH because our KH is high, our buffering capacity. In other words, we put the driftwood in, it releases tannic acids, but because our KH is so high, it serves as almost like it's a buffer. And what it's doing is as those tannic acids come in, the KH is neutralizing that, the pH doesn't really change. So for your particular situation, you're going to have to be a little bit more careful. If you want to leave the water the way it is, coming out of the tap, just be mindful of the fact that heavy bioloads are going to have a larger impact on your pH as more and more nitrate is being produced. That's going to lower your pH. Adding things like driftwood may have an impact on your pH, probably will if your KH is low. And by low, I'm assuming you're talking somewhere between like 2 and 4, something like that, right? So that could have a bigger impact. Smaller, more frequent water changes, as I already mentioned, that is going to be certainly something that you want to consider. If you want to up your KH, there are ways to do that as well. And we talk about that in the water hardness video that we do. You may consider doing things like I mentioned this a few times before, but Fritz has a cichlid salts additive that you can use that's not quite like a pH up or down, which to me is a little bit more finicky. The cichlid salts, they just seem to stabilize the pH a little bit more, so you're going to get a little bit harder water from that. It's going to maintain a stable pH, but now this pH is going to be higher. It's going to be around an 8, 8.2, and maybe that's what you've got already. But you could consider doing that, maybe adding some aragonite. You have the option of doing something like, I don't know, adding some cuttlebone or something like that. But no matter what you do, if you're going to be changing the water parameters based on the tap water that you have, I always recommend, always, do it in a container that does not have fish. Start there. Start there. Start in a 30-gallon tote. You can go get a 30-gallon tote on sale for like $8. Get a 30-gallon tote. Get yourself an air stone and an air pump so you've got water circulation. Say, okay, here I'm going to measure this water. Here's my pH. Here's my KH. Here's my GH. I'm going to add some things. Maybe I add the cichlid salts. Maybe I add some cuttlebone. Maybe I'm putting aragonite in there. What did it do? And then test that over a month and see what happens. If you're not getting a lot of fluctuation. Now, of course, the one thing that you're going to be missing there is the bioload, right? So you have to be mindful that that's going to change. Even if you do that, you're still going to have some variance because in your tank, you're going to have fish producing waste. So I hope that helps you get in the right direction. All right. Let's see here. Felicia, thank you so much for being here. I'm suddenly battling green spot algae on my Crypts and Anubias. Fert's too high, fixed it, but now how do I get the green spot off the plants without damaging them? Anubias is a lot easier than, they're both not hard to deal with. So for me, with the Anubias is sometimes I can actually just take my fingers and just rub the leaves. You might just be able to rub that off with your fingers. Anubias tend to have fairly thick leaves, and so you can be a little bit more harsh. I'm not saying go in there with a Brillo pad or like an SOS pad. Like, I got it. What the heck happened to my leaf? But sometimes you just go in there with your fingers and just rub that stuff off. Crypts, the leaves aren't quite as thick and they're not quite as resilient, so you should probably just try to rub that stuff off by hand if you can. The other option is, depending on the inhabitants of your fish tank and the other types of plants that you have, if you have other types of plants, I have found that mystery snails are marvelous for that job. In fact, and I know this is going to freak some of you out because you're like, mystery snails destroyed my tank. We have a few mystery snail breeding tanks. And one of them is in Joanna's plant farm that she has in her nano nook. And there's a bunch of mystery snails in there. And guess what? They haven't done anything to her Crypts, nothing to her Nubius. She's got Buse in there, I believe. She's got a bunch of stuff in there. They've done nothing to it. And there's probably at this point 30 mystery snails in there. At one point in a 20 long, we probably had 100 to 150 gold mystery snails in a 20 long because they were breeding like crazy. And what we would do is purposely put in things like Anubias or Crypts or things that were just covered in algae from other tanks. We're like, okay, this tank got out of hand. Well, look at the plants. We're not getting rid of the plants. So let's chuck them in the mystery snail breeding tank. Give it a week. Those plants looked amazing. They would clean them off. Even with that many mystery snails, I'm not guaranteeing this will work, but when you have that many mystery snails in a tank, they were consuming all the blackbeard algae because there was such competition for food. They're just like constantly chomp, 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 chomp. They were getting rid of all the blackbeard algae. If we had that on Anubias, they were cleaning it off. It was fantastic. So that is something else to consider. All right, let's see here. Oh, man, the thing just skipped on me. James, do you gravel vac the multis? Ours are protective of their sand creations and appear to dislike disturbances. Yes, they do. And yes, we do. To a certain extent, we will. In our shell dweller tanks, we don't necessarily shove the gravel vac into the sand because we find we don't need to. Because the multis do such a good job of stirring things up, there isn't a lot actually in the sand. It usually gets stirred up and then winds up going into one of our filters, whether it's a sponge filter or like in the 50-gallon multi-tank, we have that Cascade internal filter that does a really good job of getting stuff out of the water very, very quickly. But we will do the little swirling method where we'll kind of swirl above the surface. That is especially necessary in our Similis 20-gallon long. I don't know what it is with that tank. I really don't know what's going on with that tank, but right now it's frustrating me. At first, I thought that Eli was skipping that tank or not cleaning it or not doing the sponge filters. I'm like, dude, what is going on? He's like, Dad, I'm doing it. I don't know what's going on. But right now, lately, I've been finding myself having to do that sponge filter like twice a week. It gets coated with like a slimy, brown, nasty thing, and there's nothing dead in there. But anyway, yeah, we will go through and swirl around. Do they love it? No. A lot of people are concerned, well, what about the babies? My personal experience has been when that gravel vac gets close to the shells, especially if I'm moving it quickly, those babies go right back into the shells. Believe it or not, they're extremely hard to remove from those shells, especially when they're small. They'll swim all the way into those shells, go all the way around the corner, and wedge themselves into the very, very center of that shell. You don't believe me? For those of you who have kept shell dwellers, try getting an adult out of those shells. It's not going to happen. You could sit there and shake it and do whatever you want. Not that I recommend, don't do that, but you could, and they're not getting out of there. So the babies can get even deeper in those shells. And so I had situations where I accidentally suck up a shell and I know there's fish in there and they don't come out. And then I have to take the gravel vac out and the shell goes flying back into the water and they just stay in there. So that's how I deal with the shell dweller tanks. I usually do the swirl, just get the stuff off the surface. I don't worry so much about going into the gravel. Paul, what's going on? Jason, my water is acidic with low KH. I put just enough aragonite in my canister filter to get it up into the low to medium range. Good. Yeah, that's the whole idea, right? We want a little bit more water stability, pH stability. That is a good thing. Let's see here. Felicia, thanks for the thorough answer. I have a pea puffer in a community tank with a mystery. Will a mystery snail be fine? We did that in Joanna's 12-gallon long, and the pea puffers ignored the mystery snail, I think because the mystery snail is like, 10, 20 times the size of the pea puffer, and they're like, this isn't food, this is a giant being. I am not saying that can't go terribly wrong and that your pea puffer won't wind up biting off the antenna of the mystery snail or doing some damage. It worked for us, but I'm not saying it will work for everybody. So just kind of keep that in mind with the pea puffer. Let's see here. Thuddy Waters. Will red ram's horn snails eat multifasciatus eggs before they hatch? Do you keep snails with your multis? That's a great question. When we first set up that tank, the 50-gallon low boy I'm talking about, that tank did have a fair number of ram's horn snails and even some like your common pond pest snails. What I watched them do this is the parents, when they were protecting fry or protecting eggs, any snails that came into the vicinity of their breeding shell, they would pick up and they would move. And they would just do that all the time. So I don't think the snails ever impacted breeding. Even in some of ours right now, we've got the Malaysian trumpet snails. And I just never have noticed. I mean, we've got tanks and tanks filled with Similis and Maltese, and it never really seemed to impact it. So I don't stress about them. Eventually what happened is all the snails went away. So I think the Maltese finally decided, hey, I'm picking this thing up. Ooh, I just got a taste of that. That actually tasted pretty good. Let me go ahead and munch on the rest of the soft part of this thing that's trying to enter my shell. So eventually they all basically went away. Slinky Slink. Probably a dumb question. Oh boy, here we go. No, I'm just kidding. There's no dumb questions. Let's see here. But do mystery snails breed no matter the color or gold with gold, etc.? Yeah, they'll hybridize. So if you've got different colors mixed together, that's how we get some of the varieties that we get. So if you've got golds and blues or magentas or purples or whatever, they will hybridize. I haven't worked with them long enough to know, okay, what's going to happen if you mix a gold and magenta? What's the percentage of golds versus magenta versus something else? But they will absolutely hybridize. If you don't want that to happen, mystery snails, a lot of people worry about mystery snails breeding. Like, I don't want a bunch of mystery snails. I don't want 200 of my 20 long like you had. That's a very simple thing to deal with. And the way you deal with that is, the great thing about mystery snails is they lay this giant egg clutch, which will be about the size of a thumb, above the water line. So either against the glass, we find a lot of ours lay their eggs like on the bottom side of the lids, on the glass lids. You just remove that thing, chuck it in the garbage, you're not getting any mystery snails. And it's very easy to see. And it takes it takes a couple weeks for those things to hatch. So it's not like it's like, oh my gosh, the clutch is there. I didn't catch it on the first day. And now I'm going to have 1,000 mystery snails. No, they're pretty easy to control. Jackie says, hold on. Oh, a corridor has scuff mark on his head, probably from decor zooming around. Nothing aggressive in the tank. Do you suggest just watching it or some kind of treatments? It keeps staring at me. I would watch it. I mean, it's hard because I haven't seen the mark on its head, but if it's not something that's gaping, oozing, fungusy looking, it's just kind of a scratch. Fish usually heal remarkably well. So I've had lots of fish that have had little marks and I didn't treat it, and they seem to do fine. Part of it just depends on the severity. Rocky and Miles found ram's horns in 2 tanks. I'm torn between keeping them or getting rid of them. Heard many nightmare stories that I'll be overrun quickly. One is betta only, other small community. Yeah, they can. Ram's horn snails, the common pond pest snails, they absolutely can overrun a tank very, very quickly. But here's the wonderful thing. It really is based on the amount of food that you provide to those snails. Now, you said you've got a betta in one tank. This is the easiest situation to deal with. One, your tank is, it's even if it's a 2.5 gallon, it's basically a very low stocked tank. 2, bettas like to eat from the surface. So as long as you're feeding the betta and only the betta, so you're giving it the food that it needs, so whatever floating food, whether that's flakes or floating pellets, and you're just spot feeding that fish, the ram's horn snails are going to take care of algae, whatever algae is there, but they're only going to grow to the food sources available. Same thing with the community tank. Now, the issue is anytime you've got bottom feeders in the tank, so maybe you've got cory cats, or maybe you've got, I don't know, some type of scavenger fish, some type of pleco, oto, something like that. And if you're feeding those, this can be especially a problem with shrimp. When you're feeding those, again, you just want to be mindful. Okay, I'm not putting in too much food that's going to rest on the bottom, because the ram's horn snails, they're crazy. Like if you put something like some kind of a sinking pellet in there, they can smell that out. Give them a half hour, you will have a mound of snails on top of that algae wafer or piece of cucumber or whatever. It's actually a great way to get rid of them. So just as long as you're mindful about how much you're feeding and not overfeeding, I make zero effort to keep snails out of our tanks. None. I like them. I have a variety of what would be considered pest snails, from pond snails, ram's horn snails. I've got the Malaysian trumpet snails like all over the place. If there is a tank in my fish room that lacks snails, it's only because the fish in that tank are eating them. It's not because we've tried to not have them in certain tanks. Because once they get in, what you said is correct. It's very difficult, especially with the pond snails and the ram's horn snails, to get rid of them, because you'll see the little stringy egg patches, but a lot of times you don't see them. You'll see the little tiny babies, and it's like, oh my gosh, they're impossible to remove when they're that small. So then you pretty much have to wait until they're big enough to remove anyway. So just control feeding, and it will be okay. Milkshake mistake. Should I quarantine plants from fish store tanks? I don't. Doesn't mean you can't. Doesn't mean you shouldn't. Well, I guess so. I generally don't buy a lot of plants from fish stores because we generally get them at the swaps and the auctions, and I know the people who are selling them, and we've always had good luck. There's 2 ways to look at it. A lot of people don't quarantine them. It's probably less necessary if there were no fish in those tanks that had the plants. Can ick transfer from one tank to another via live plants? Absolutely. So if there was a tank in there and the fish had ick, could you transfer it to a new tank? Sure. Doesn't hurt anything to quarantine. If you've got a quarantine tank and it makes you feel better, makes you sleep better at night, especially if you've got fish that you really care about or they're expensive and it's an elaborate setup, just chuck them in a quarantine tank. Let them sit in there for a week or 2. You don't have to quarantine them for 4 weeks, because if there's no live fish in there, if it was an ick parasite and that tank is just kicking at 78 degrees, usually within about 7 days, those ick parasites are going to be motile, and they're going to be looking for a host that they can't find. They're going to die anyway. So I don't quarantine them, but you certainly can. All right, let's see here. Scrolling on down. Carolina girl. Wow, we're on a mystery snail kick tonight, huh? Do mystery snails get algae growth on their shells? My gold mystery snail shell has something greenish. Yeah, they do. Ours do that too. I'm not 100% sure, and I think someone like Lab Snails would probably be able to answer that, or Snail Team 6. It seems like the snails where the shells are maybe not quite as healthy as they should be are more prone to that than snails that have a really thick, nice shell. But we do have snails in our 20-gallon, our gold mystery snails in particular, just like yours, that get a little bit of green algae. I tend not to worry about it. I've been putting in more calcium chips and stuff for them. If there's a calcium chip spirulina mix that is sold, where I will put that in there, and I think that's certainly helping. But yeah, they do. Blue Rhino. Thoughts on fluval electric gravel vac, and how would you tell the gender of a super red bristlenose pleco that is a juvenile that is about 1.5 inches, and how to make it grow faster? All right. Thoughts on the electric gravel vac? They're fine. I don't use electric gravel vacs. It's not worth my time because I just use the hand pump starter guy. A lot cheaper. They work great. So that's how I roll with it, and I get enough suction where I don't need to worry about it. But if you want to try it out, hey, as fish keepers, we like to try new things, right? So certainly nothing wrong with it. I haven't heard anything wrong with it, but I haven't used it. Super red bristlenose, how are you going to tell if it's a male or female? At 1.5 inches, I don't. I don't even try. I wait until what a lot of people do. I'm like, well, I see the little sticky guys coming out in all directions. That's a male. Females do get a little bit of growth on their nose, but not nearly as much. But usually you can't get a pretty good idea of that until they are older and larger than 1.5 inches. So by the time the males get to be about 3 inches, you're going to see more extensive growth, and it becomes more obvious. If you want to really see the differences, if you look at probably the 2021 Fish Room Tour Part 1 that we did, if you just fast forward to where I show the 40-gallon breeders, I show our bristlenose breeding tank there. And then also in the 2020 Fish Room Tour Part 1, was that Part 1? I think that was the one where I was dumb and I busted that thing out into like 7 parts. So Part 1 or 2, I show that tank there, and you'll get a really good idea because you'll see males and females together, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But at 1.5 inches, you won't know. If you're interested in breeding them, the best thing to do is grab, it's almost like cichlids. Grab 5 or 6, and eventually you will, with those kind of numbers, the likelihood that you get at least one male and one female is pretty high. So that's how I roll with it. All right, let's see here. What is that? Hold on. Let me look over here. Killer Kitty. Thank you so much. With a cat sticker. Thank you. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate it. All right. Illville. What's the average percentage of water I should aim for when I do daily, weekly water change on a less than 3-week-old tank? I use Fritz Turbo. That's a great question. You're asking some good questions. So what's the average percentage of water I should aim for when I do a daily, weekly water change on less than a 3-week-old tank? As long as you don't have ammonia, and if you're using Fritz Turbo, you probably don't. As long as you don't have ammonia or nitrite, I'm not doing anything different with my water changes. I'm still looking for nitrates. I'm still trying to make sure that they stay under 20 parts per million. So that's what's guiding me. If I don't have sufficient nitrates, I'm not doing water change. As long as I don't have So again, with a 3-week-old tank, your biggest concern is making sure that you don't have, something's going on over here. Making sure that you don't have ammonia or nitrite. And as long as you don't have those things, with a 3-week-old tank, the likelihood that you're going over 20 parts per million, because usually with a newer tank, you're probably not, if you're asking this type of questions you're asking, which are really good ones, I'm assuming you know enough not to crazy overstock your tank, which you're probably not doing. So it's going to take a while sometimes for nitrates to build up to 20 parts per million or more. So give it time, let that happen, and once that happens, then it's just based on that. All right, trying to keep those nitrates less than 20 parts per million, and you'll be in good shape. Now, of course, with your particular situation, maybe you want to kind of tone that down a little bit. So maybe you get to 15. You're like, I'm going to do a 10%. And you stay there, and maybe now you're doing a 10% a couple times a week just to make sure you're not getting that fluctuation in the pH. So that would be a way I would go. Killer Kitty, thank you so much for becoming a primetime partner. Really appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed the experience. We will have a video out for you guys tomorrow. We'll walk around the fish room, show you some stuff. It'll be cool. All right, let's see here. Scrolling on down. Chris Trapp, how many hours a day do you run your lights? 9. So we run our lights on all of our fish tanks in our entire home, including these ones right behind us, on the exact same schedule. They're on for 2.5 hours in the morning, so they come on at 6:30 in the morning and they shut off at 9. The reason we do that in the morning is we're not generally like watching the tanks or like enjoying them because everybody's running around, normally getting ready for school or work. They're on for that amount of time because, one, I know I want to feed them in the morning. I want to give them time to wake up. So if they come on at 6:30 and I stroll down in the fish room at 7 o'clock to feed them, they've had a half hour to wake up. So it's really important when you are feeding fish that you give them sufficient amounts of time to wake up, because some of us know this. If you just turn on the lights and throw food in there, they're sleeping. They're like, it would be like someone waking you up, like, pounding you on the side of the head, get up, get up, get up, and throw eggs and bacon in your face. You're like, whoa, time out, man. I'm not ready for this yet. I'm still trying to open my eyes. Same thing with fish. So we give them at least 30 minutes with the lights on. And so when people come to our house when we're traveling, I always tell them, here's the time when the lights are on. Please don't come before 30 minutes after they turn on. So we'll feed them at 7. You also have to give them time to eat, right? So the last thing we want to do in the morning is, if they're on from 6:30 to 9, I'm not walking down there at 8:45 trying to throw food in the tanks, because there's a lot of them. I mean, this is a big process for us with this many tanks, or the live baby brine, because what's the point in feeding the live baby brine 10 minutes before the lights go off? And yeah, all the fry and even some of the smaller adults, they're eating, but then the lights shut off and they haven't eaten at all. By the time the lights come back on in the evening, that stuff is all dead, because you just put brine shrimp, which live in salt water, in a freshwater tank. So 2.5 hours in the morning, and then they come back on at 4 o'clock in the evening, and they shut off at 10:30 at night. And so usually in the evening, either myself or one of the boys go down there at 9 o'clock, feed them, and they've still got like an hour and a half to consume all their food and do their stuff. So that's what's worked for us. If you've got a heavily planted tank with some highlight plants, you're running CO2, that situation could be very different. And in that case, I'm not dialed in there. So if I were running, we don't run CO2, we don't run highlight plants, and so that situation might call for something different. If you're not running any live plants, you've got a lot more freedom in terms of when the lights go on and off, because you're not trying to keep plants alive. All right, let's see here. Amanda said, I'm late. No Joanna tonight? I'm out! No, so I mentioned this, and for those of you who came in a little bit later, Joanna is not here tonight because she had a little family thing that she had to deal with. And what's crazy is this whole topic was her idea, and she had a bunch of really cool ones. And then she's like, "Oh my gosh, I've got this thing that just came up." I'm like, "All right, we'll go. I'll do it all myself." But what makes it better? I've got the coolest fish people ever, not only on the face of the earth right now, but to ever live on this earth, are right here with us tonight. So it's pretty awesome. Klaus Aquatics, thank you so much for the super chat. Appreciate it. My mother won a betta fish at a work party, and now I'm currently making a 5-gallon planted tank for her new friend while watching your stream. Keep it up, and see you at Aquasella. Oh, that's awesome, man. So can't wait to see you at Aquasella. First of all, second of all, it's always fun. It's always fun getting somebody set up with a tank. And I don't know if your mother's ever had a tank before, but it's fun when you see somebody get excited about something new, right? I've got some friends and some neighbors who are like, yeah, I'm thinking about setting up a tank. I'm like, well, if you ever need assistance, let me know. And it's cool because sometimes if we've had fish for a while or we've set up a bunch of tanks, we kind of forget how exciting it is for a brand new person to have their first tank and watch the fish. Like, wow, this is crazy. This is amazing. And that's really exciting. So very nice. All right, let's see here. Let's see. I'm going to go back up. Caitlin says, I'm making a DIY python. I thought it said DIY prison. I'm telling you, my eyes, it's not good that Joanna's not here because I'm probably mispronouncing names, and I'm not doing it on purpose. I'm not trying to be rude. I'm sorry if I did. let's see here. Caitlin says, I'm making a DIY python hook, but how should I clean the inside of the PVC to make it fish safe? Just water? Yeah, I don't worry about it. Rinse it out, make sure there's no dirt in there, and just roll with it. I've never had an issue doing it, but that's just how I deal with it. Let's see here. Alan Tooth, what's up? Jason, you're the best. I go to your videos whenever I have a question. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Glad you're here. Glad the videos are helping. What? Bates Yang, I guess ignoring my question suits you? Oh, I'm sorry. Ask it again. I never, ever, ever try to ignore a question. I know sometimes people are like, man, I asked that question and I didn't get it answered. This guy must hate me. Never the case. Never. So if don't spam the chat, obviously, but if I miss a question, again, it helps if you put the @Primetime Aquatics there, because that's kind of where I focus in. I focus in on the little orange thing because that tells me there is a question to be answered. But do that and hopefully I won't miss it again. Let's see here. Brandon says, what would be a good tetra to keep with Tapajos? That's a great question. So Tapajos are geophagus. They are amazing cichlids. New World cichlids, American cichlids. They get about 4 or 5 inches. If I've done a species profile on geophagus Tapajos, I promise you they are amazing fish. Absolutely amazing. We lost our group to some kind of a weird thing that went on in that 55 gallon. That was a devastating thing. They're incredible fish. So tetras. The thing with the tetras is you need to manage size, right? Because the geophagus are cichlids. They do get to be about 5 inches or so, at least the males do. We want to have tetras that are large enough not to fit in their mouth, but we also want to be careful that we don't have fin nippy tetras, right? Because one of the reasons you're keeping geophagus is you want to see those amazing fins and the trailers, and the last thing we want to do is have a really fast tetra be like, I think I can nip at that thing and I can turn around and swim away before it ever knows I did it. So tetras that I would add to a geophagus Tapajos tank, I would do something along the size of a black skirt or white skirt tetra or a black phantom tetra. I'm not saying you have to do those particular ones, although those would be good examples. I would definitely do something about that size. I would stay away from neon size tetras because like the black neons get pretty big. That could be borderline okay, but you just never know. And geophagus for the most, Tapajos especially, aren't going to go out of their way to eat other fish. It's just not really their game. But we generally just want to stay away from fish that could fit in their mouth. So when it comes to tetras with geophagus, I love black phantom tetras. Black skirt, white skirt tetras would work. Congo tetras would be really cool. They have similar colors to the geophagus. The Colombian tetra I like a lot as well. Those would be an interesting one. I probably, in not only tetras too, but consider the larger rasboras like the brilliant green rasboras. Full-grown pork chop rasboras might work. Trying to think of what else. I'm not as... You got to be careful. So something like a Buenos Aires tetra is like one I was talking about that I probably wouldn't add. Buenos Aires tetras get to be a little stupid around one another, and they are nippy and they're more aggressive. Probably better suited for a cichlid tank that's slightly more aggressive, maybe with like green severums or something like that. You might be able to make it work, but I just, the Buenos Aires tetras for me are not so great. The red eye tetras are kind of borderline for me as well, but hopefully that gives you a good starting point. John Wood, put a new core sponge filter in my new Cory breeding tank. How long should I let it go until I clean it the first time? That's a great question. So as most of you know, or maybe you don't know, I am a huge advocate of just cleaning my sponge filters in chlorinated tap water right out of the sink, because I've done a video on this, the science behind why it doesn't matter, and that is the contact time between the chlorine or the chloramines. It doesn't matter, either one. People get hung up like, the study that you mentioned was chloramines. Yeah, and chloramines are even more stable than chlorine, so the chlorine is going to have even less issues. So if you're cleaning a sponge filter every week, if you're doing it every single week, it's not going to get that nasty. So it's basically, I throw it in the sink, squeeze it out a few times, right back in the tank it goes. The contact time between the chlorine or the chloramines and the bacteria is maybe 10 to 15 seconds. That is not enough time to do any serious damage to the beneficial microbes. Right back in the tank it goes. Your question specifically, okay, how how long should I wait? That's a great question because I don't do that starting week 1. What I will typically do if I'm using the Fritz, usually it's the Fritzzyme 7 because I'm not using a big bio load. I don't have ammonia issues already, but if you're using Fritzzyme 7, Fritz Turbo Start, maybe you have another filter that you can already put in an existing tank. I'm assuming if you're running a corridor, and you know fish, so I'm assuming that maybe that filter was either in another tank or you've got some other type of filtration in the tank right now that's already got cycled filter media. So I'm going to assume that's the case. If that were the case, I wouldn't touch that filter for at least 4 or 5 weeks. All right, minimally. Give it 4 or 5 weeks to start getting beneficial bacteria. And then if it's not dirty, don't touch it. Right? And until that sponge filter looks like, okay, the flow is slowing down. If that's now the only thing in the tank with your cories and the water, like we talked about before, the water's not looking so great, there's a film on the glass, then it might be time. But minimally 4 to 5 weeks. If you were to look at some of my earliest videos and you look at the sponge filters and these newer tanks, what you're going to find is jammed between the sponge filter and the aquarium glass is a nasty piece of filter floss that came out of another tank. That's how I would, before the whole Fritzzyme thing came around, that's how I would cycle my tanks, is I would just jam nasty filter floss that has been aged in a tank that was fully cycled between the sponge, and that would allow it to do its job. I never had an issue with that. I never had ammonia spikes or anything like that. So that's how I would roll with it. Wait a little bit. Be patient. All right, let's see. I'm scrolling down. Oh, now the chat is skipping all over the place because you know how I am with this chat thing here. Regina, thank you so much for the super chat. Great live stream. Jason, you're doing great. Thank you. I feel like I'm missing half of I am missing half of the people that are usually sitting here. So usually Joanna has things to add and she sees cool things. And that's probably why I'm missing some of these questions, because usually she's scrolling through and doing the thing. Finn Wiggles, thank you so much for the #1 fan jumping, man. Appreciate it. Glad you're here. Hope you're doing awesome. Let's see here. Snowball says, how long would it take for a fresh sponge filter to get back? I like it. I just answered that question. So hopefully that question applies to you. How long would it take for a fresh sponge filter to get beneficial bacteria after being put in a cycle tank? Give it like 4 weeks. 4 weeks and you're going to be in pretty good shape. Now I say that, but that doesn't mean take that sponge filter out of the cycle tank, chuck it in a new tank, and then heavily stock the new tank. One of the biggest mistakes that fish keepers make, usually it's new fish keepers, is, okay, let's just say, we'll go extreme. I've got a hang-on back filter that's been on my 29-gallon for 3 years. I'm just going to take that entire thing off and stick it on a new 29-gallon and then stock the tank as heavily as I stocked the original. Not fully appreciating that it wasn't just the filter that was accomplishing the nitrification process. It was all the surfaces in that tank. And then if you stock it just as much as the original with just the filter and the media that's housing the beneficial bacteria, that's when you could potentially get an ammonia or nitrite spike. So one of the things that we want to do as fish keepers, and one of the recommendations we want to make to people when we meet new fish keepers, patience. I know it looks cool when we see a fully stocked fish tank on the box. We take the fish tank home like, wow, I want the gourami and the angelfish and the platies and the swordtails and the cory cats, and I want all that. And they were all in the picture of the 15-gallon, so I'm going to stick them all in that tank today. Even if you've got a cycled sponge filter or hang on back, it's a bad idea, because especially, and keep in mind, this is especially true if you do what I do, and that is if you're rinsing your filter media, your sponge filters, or your sponges in your hang on back filters in tap water. Also consider what's happening over time in our fish tanks is we are relying more and more and more on the surfaces inside the tank, driftwood, rocks, live plants, fake plants, the top parts of the substrate, the back and sides of the glass itself are housing more and more and more of the beneficial bacteria relative to the filter itself, because we're changing out that media. And at that point, the media is now primarily there for mechanical filtration to pull stuff out of the water column, not to do the biological filtration. So sometimes what happens, and you have to be careful of this, if you ever go to changing out the media every week, or, hey, I'm going to rinse my sponge filters in tap water. One thing to consider is if you haven't been doing that, you might have more of the beneficial bacteria actually in the filter relative to the surfaces because they haven't had the opportunity to be potentially washed away a little bit more aggressively or experience some die-off, because you're going to have a little bit, but probably not too much. So Pompeii Ranch, thank you. Appreciate the dancing little heart-blowing crazy little guy. Thank you. Appreciate it. Jesse, just recently cleaned my canister filter. I took the media basket out and gave it a quick 10-second rinse under the sink to wash out the detritus. Was that a bad thing? Nope. Here's the other thing that a lot of people don't, I don't think we, and probably because there would be no reason to think about it, but beneficial bacteria do not adhere to fecal matter in uneaten food. They don't adhere to that. They adhere to solid surfaces. So when we have sponges in a hang-on back filter, when you have media in a canister filter, especially in a canister filter where there isn't really any gas exchange going on there, or not a lot, when you have a sponge filter, if that thing gets clogged, and now you've seen sponge filters like, oh, this thing is just a solid brick at this point, I can't even squeeze out. Like, you ever had those sponge filters where like, oh, I let this go too long, you throw it in a, if you're doing it in a bucket, or like for us, we do it in a sink, and you kind of, it's like, oh my gosh, this thing, I can barely even squeeze it because it's so filled with stuff that it's now like hard to squeeze. Once that happens, you've done a few things. One, you've cut off the oxygen flow. You've cut off the water flow, which is reducing the oxygen through that sponge filter. So a lot of the beneficial bacteria are dead anyway. Two, you've also suffocated them because the detritus in that filter media is now blocking their ability to gain access to oxygen because of the reduced water flow. And they can't adhere. It's not like they can be like, all right, I'm just sitting here on the actual fabric of the sponge filter, just chilling out. Oh, look, there's detritus. It's covering my face. It's getting kind of stuffy. Let me go ahead and wiggle my way to the top. That doesn't happen. So as, you know, imagine you're a microbe and you're connected to a surface. Now imagine fish poop, uneaten food. Slap, 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 slap all over your body. You're getting buried. Pretty soon you're not going to be able to breathe. The microbes that accomplish the nitrification process are aerobic like we are. They need oxygen. If they don't have it, they're not accomplishing anything. They're just dying. So we want to make sure that that's not happening in our filtration. All right, let's see here. Brendan Wood, would you consider creating an aquarium science series video about osmotic shock? Yeah, I would, and I will. That is something. So for those of you who enjoy those videos, they're not wildly popular, unfortunately, because it kind of stinks because there are some videos I really enjoy doing, and I know some of you really enjoy it, and it takes a lot of effort to go through and find the science articles because we're actually trying to use primary research, peer-reviewed journals, and to find that stuff that's free and then to analyze it and to make it into a 5 or 10 or 12-minute video takes a lot of time. And sometimes it doesn't really gain a whole lot of traction, but I'm going to be doing those again. But I want to wait until the summer's over because as those of you who have been in fish keeping for a long time realize, the summer's, there's a lull, right? Everybody gets busy. The fish tanks sometimes take a back seat to life and sports and nice weather and vacations and just other things like, oh, I can go out and garden now. I can paint the house. I can do whatever. I can take the classic car out for a drive. So interest in fish keeping traditionally kind of does one of these. You ask anybody who owns a fish store, except for last year when people were kind of locked in their homes. This year has been a very different situation because a lot of people are like, oh, I can do stuff now. And it's been like a year and a half. So what I'm waiting for is to people to come back and be like, okay, that was cool. You know, in certain parts of the world, it's starting to get colder out now. It's, you know, school season's back and things are settling down. And then once that happens, the science series will come back to life for sure. Jan says, I just noticed one of my Oscars has a Popeye. How do you suggest I treat it? Not due to poor water quality, possible injury, no aggression in that tank. Okay, so that's usually the number one thing when it comes to Popeye is you want to test your water right away. So when we're talking about water quality, make sure there's no ammonia spike, no nitrite spike, no high nitrates. Which means, you know, something with Popeye, maybe nitrates have been elevated 30, 40, 50 parts per million for an extended period of time. I doubt that's the case because you said your water quality is good. You're thinking it might be an injury. First thing I would say is the fish eating? So if it is, Again, Popeye usually suggests that there's some type of bacterial infection. It's not always external. So I've said this a million times, but when you have an internal bacterial infection or parasite, dousing the water full of meds, while it can sometimes work, it's not the best way to go about it. The best way to treat bacterial infections or internal parasites is with medicated foods. This Popeye in particular, I know a lot of people like to say, okay, just do this, 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 and this, it's going to be fine. I have found that without knowing what specifically is causing it, that's sometimes not the best thing to do, is just be like, okay, just try this med, then this med, then this med, and then none of it works, and all we've done is created some more antibiotic-resistant microbes that are capable of transferring stuff to other microbes, which would be bad. So, one, keep an eye on it. So I don't know how long it's been that way. If we're talking about a day or two, if it's not getting any worse, if it's getting better, that's a good sign. So if it's getting better on its own, maybe we don't need to treat it. If it's not super bad, now if it's like bulging out of his eye, at that point, it's probably not going to get better. And so my suggestion would be check out FritzAquatics.com. They have a number of meds. And again, I don't want to recommend any one. They will have meds. Say, okay, treats this, treats that. Pick probably one or two and then see if that's going to be helpful. Okay, Summer Rose. What can I mix with my electric blue acara? What other types of fish? Thank you. Electric blue acara are great fish because they're not particularly, at least the ones I've always had, have not been particularly aggressive. They don't get huge for a cichlid, so you're probably looking at 5 to 6 inches max. Even the males, that's about as big as they get. They will eat smaller fish. So, I mean, if you put in small tetras, rasboras, they're going to go missing eventually because fish eat other fish that can fit in their mouth. So that's just something to consider. If I am mixing fish with electric blue acara, again, they're in the right size tank. They can be fairly active, especially if you have a group of them. What would I put in there? My bottom feeders would probably be cory cats. Pick something cool. My algae situation would most likely be, I'd probably go something like a long fin, blue-eyed albino pleco, maybe some super reds. Again, I don't know the size of the tank, so all this is obviously dependent upon the size of the tank. If you're looking for schooling fish or shoaling type fish, again, we're trying to stay bigger than a neon, so some of the suggestions I had for the Geophagus would fit well here. You don't have to worry about the long fin trailers as much, although the males do get them, but not extreme like the Geophagus do. So maybe you're looking at, like I said, the white skirt, the black skirt tetras, the black phantoms, the Congos, the Colombians. You could do rainbow fish, which would be really cool. But you want to stay with your schooling fish, provided that you have the tank size to accommodate them, at least a couple inches, right? Just so that they're not so small where they're going to get eaten. Okay, let me scroll down here, make sure I haven't, oh my gosh, okay, we got a bunch of stuff coming up down here. Bunny Viper, and thank you so much. Enjoy it all. Good to hear. Oh, Bunny Viper, now I see the question. Hi there, confused about Hecali. Threadfin acara, some type of geo. The albinos have pink lips, males, long red streamers. I know you love these. Please settle name debate for me. So a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, they at one point were labeled Geophagus hecali. They now have their own genus, Actorichthys hecali. They are very close in terms of their behavior, their look, the way that they inhabit a tank to Geophagus. They can get fairly large, so I've got the albinos, and I've also had the standards. They are absolutely amazing fish. They are every bit as beautiful as any of the Geophagus I've ever kept when full grown. They, as the name implies, threadfin. You're going to get those very long trailers, provided that you don't have fish in the tank that are going to fin nip at them. Again, I can't stress this enough. If you're ever keeping fish where the main feature is the fact that they get those long trailers, don't put fish in there like barbs and stuff that are going to be nipping at them. And sometimes you have to be careful, like, okay, how many males am I going to put in this tank? One of the most disappointing things I see is when somebody is keeping a really nice, like Geophagus wine-milleri or Frontosa, if you want to get out of the Geophagus land, or veil-tail angels, and it's like, and their fins are all chopped up, especially with the Frontosa. You get a bunch of males in there, and they're kind of bickering with one another, and they're biting off the trailers. Oh, that's so sad. So the Hecali, yeah, they're Geophagus-like. They're going to spend some time sifting through substrates. So ideally, like right now, the albinos that we have in our 75-gallon, we put them in there more or less to kind of grow them out, but they're on gravel, and it's like, and it's not even small gravel, it's big. That's not the ideal situation for them substrate-wise. Aggression-wise, they're kind of like Geophagus, where I wouldn't call them overly aggressive, but they're not going to shy away from fish, but they do get overpowered by the more aggressive, like green severums, or if you had, some like certainly like Jack Dempsey's, Texas cichlids, green terrors would absolutely be a bad mix. So you just got to be careful that way. All right, let's see. Snowball says, "What is your favorite tank behind you? I love what Joanna has done. She inspired me to set up a 5-gallon nano." Well, that's cool. She'll be glad to hear that. Favorite tank behind me. I probably would say the one over here, the Medaka rice fish, just because when you really see, and they're so hard to film. I did a species profile, I remember, like years ago on the Java rice fish, which are a little bit different, but these fish are 100% constantly in motion. And I don't know what it is about their color, but it also makes it really hard to like get them on camera and focus. So you almost have to like kind of come back. It's very hard to get like a really good up close picture of them without a lot of patience. But I do like that tank. I think that's my favorite because of those fish. The one over here, and I guess that would be your, I don't know, over here, far, whatever that is, left. That's probably my favorite because of those fish. But I like them all. I think she did a great job on, and she talks about this in the video today, but it was one of those things where we could have gone a couple ways with the tanks behind us. Way number one is we have 4 setups, and we could have done a large tank back here. This dresser thing is massive. I mean, I have zero hesitation on that thing, putting a 55-gallon on. So we thought about, okay, do we want to do a 55-gallon? It would have been a little taller than this, about the same length. But then it's just one setup, right? Do we do multiple tanks? We had some bookshelf tanks. We still have some bookshelf tanks from Lifeguard Aquatics that we have to set up that we're really looking forward to. We thought about putting those back there. We thought about stacking them. And we were like, okay, what's that going to look like? Are they all going to be on camera? Do we make these 4 separate setups, or do we kind of blend them together? And ultimately she decided with her vision that she wanted to kind of make a similar feel to all 4 of the tanks, as opposed to having very different feels, like, oh, here's black sand, here's tan, here's white. She just thought it would be more visually appealing. Hopefully it is. Hopefully you like it. All right, let's see here. I am moving on around, and I am scrolling around looking for stuff, looking for questions. Blue Rhino. Thoughts on grabbing plants like from a lake? And would I need to worry about snails? If so, would I quarantine them? And would you make the super red bristlenose pleco grow faster? Okay, so grabbing plants from a lake. I don't do it. I think there's a higher likelihood that you could introduce parasites into your fish tank by grabbing plants. Not saying that I haven't done it. Would I do it if I were setting up a tank that was going to be more of a North American sort of biotope? Maybe. But yeah, you definitely will be thinking about snails, parasites. Keep in mind that we don't have to worry about nearly as many parasites in the aquarium hobby compared to what's going on in nature, because a lot of the parasites that have an impact on fish need a third host in that life cycle. And so they might be going from fish to bird to some type of insect and back. And so there might be a third host that, well, generally speaking, we're not worried about that. So maybe it's like, oh, fish to bird to snail back to fish, where it's like, okay, well, we've got 2 of those. But as soon as that parasite goes to fish, there's no birds flying around your house that are eating the fish, where that parasite can complete its life cycle and then go back into the snail and do all that stuff. So once you get into nature, you could potentially introduce something into a tank. So yes, if I were bringing plants in from nature, I would absolutely quarantine them, keep an eye on them. And in terms of the super red, to get them to grow faster, super red bristlenose, generally speaking, bristlenose in general grow pretty slow. And what I recommend is I very rarely try to get fish to grow fast. I generally just make sure that they've got adequate nutrition, and so that they're doing well, they're getting the food that they need. But I never try to force feed them. I never try to power feed my fish. The exception to that is like some fish, you might have to pump them up on bloodworms or something, or nutrient dense foods if you want them to breed. That's a different situation. But just for growth, I just let them do their thing. Have patience. You will be rewarded. Bristlenose, plecos, especially the super reds I found, grow even slower than the standards. I generally, like if I want to get them to breed, a little bit more on the bloodworm side. Rapashi, which is a gel-based food, can be really good. It's a little bit messy, especially if you're using gravel in that tank. So the Rapashi, the gel-based foods are really good because you can make like a little Tupperware and then just take a butter knife, and after the stuff solidifies, you can cut them into chunks and just chuck the chunks in the tank. And there's a lot of nutrients in there. You can mix in even more like spirulina powder if you want to. But those are the better foods when it comes to, sinking pellets. You can do that. If you really want to get extreme, they have sinking pellets that are more for carnivores. But I don't try to make anything grow crazy fast. I just make sure that they're well fed. What about having a quarantine tank with methylene blue? I differ in opinion from some who always put medications in their quarantine tanks. I don't ever do that unless there is a reason to, unless there's an obvious reason to. So I know that, some people, and there's I can see the logic in wanting to put meds in a quarantine tank. Now, let me rephrase. Let me be clear here. I don't put meds in a quarantine tank unless I see obvious signs of disease. There's a couple reasons. One, and I think this is a really important distinction, I'm getting most of my fish from clubs, right? So the GCCA, the green water, where most of these people have bred these fish. They've kept them in their tanks for a long period of time. The risk relative to other sources is pretty low. I never put meds in the tanks in that case unless something's happened. It's extremely rare that I ever get disease buying fish from the swaps and auctions. The next most risky thing to do is buy from a local fish store. Obviously, if one has a really good reputation, the risk is lower. If one's got a fairly bad reputation, that risk is going to be higher. There have been times where I really wanted a fish. I knew it was coming from a place that has a bad track record. The most I will do at that point is sometimes I will put some ick meds in there just because I'm like, okay, every 75% of the time that I buy fish from this place, I get ick. So I'm not going to wait for the fish to get ick. I'm just going to actually go ahead and do it. But that begs the question, why are you buying fish from a place that you know has got a 75% chance of having sick fish? It's extremely rare that I do that, but in those very rare instances, maybe then. If I were doing wild caught fish, there might be a stronger reason to certainly do some of the deworming, internal parasite, general cure type stuff. But I still maintain the overwhelming majority of the time I'm not putting meds in a tank. And methylene blue is a med, right? It's an antimicrobial that people use, and it's especially popular when breeding fish. A lot of people use the methylene blue to make sure there's no fungus growing on the eggs. I haven't done this yet, and I know some guys in the GCCA, we were talking not long ago, what they actually do is they don't use the methylene blue. They weren't actually having very good luck with it in keeping fungus off of fish eggs. They were actually using very small doses of hydrogen peroxide, and they were getting like 100% hatch rates with this stuff. So I'll have to mess with it a little bit more to make sure it's working. But yeah, I don't use meds in quarantine tanks unless it needs to be. Part of the reason for that, and I didn't finish my thought, is antibiotic resistance, right? And not just antibiotics, but resistance to protozoan, antiprotozoal meds, antifungal meds. It's absolutely happening. I'm actually, in the science series, I'm going to do a much more thorough video based on science as to why that can be dangerous. And hopefully it will just get people thinking about maybe that's long term when we're thinking globally about not only the fish keeping hobby, but just generally speaking, why that might not be the best thing. So yeah. All right, let's see here. Carlo asks, do you use any root tabs for planted tanks? If so, which one do you recommend? Great question. So when it comes to root tabs, there's a few different ways to look at it. I only would consider root tabs in tanks where there are plants that have a root system that's growing into the substrate. So I don't use root tabs for anything that is going to be primarily feeding from the water column, which would include things like water sprite, wisteria, hornwort, anubias, the floating guppy grass, any of the floating plants. There's no point in putting root tabs in there. Usually when we start a planted tank, and maybe like, so for instance, plants that would like to have root tabs, I'm just thinking beginner plants. So crypts, sword plants would be another one where they have an extensive root system. Yes, we will put root tabs in. Now, generally speaking, the vast majority of the root tabs that we use are the DIY Osmocote Plus root tabs. I've done a video on how to do that. We have never had an issue with that. They are literally a million times cheaper than anything you could buy store-bought. All right, and they work. In fact, all of these tanks back here, if you see at least the first 3 videos where Joanna set those up, you'll see the little pops up putting in root tabs. They were all just 00 gel capsules with Osmocote Plus. You just scoop it in, cap it, shove it in the substrate. In those tanks, we probably only put in 2 or 3 because they're not, I mean, they're only like 12 by 12, so there's not really a big need for a lot of them. So that's what we do initially. You would be surprised how many tanks we have. And you can go back and look at our videos, look at our fish room tours, how few tanks we actually use root tabs in, even if there are root feeders, after that initial time. Why? Especially with gravel, the fish are supplying the root tabs for you. That fish waste goes into the gravel. It gets into there. The plants can use it. We've got, some of you, if you look at the fish room tours, we've got these big giant sword plants. We've got big crypts, and I haven't put root tabs in the substrate in downstairs in the fish room. I don't know if it's maybe a year. I mean, it's not like I'm walking around and like, okay, it's been 6 months, time to put root tabs in. I just don't do it. Now, maybe if I did, would the plants grow a little bit larger? I don't know, maybe, but they're growing just fine now. It's not like they're all dying off. You guys can look at the videos. That's the nice thing about being on YouTube. You can just be like, okay, is this working? What he's saying is working? Okay, well, the plants, yeah, maybe they're not growing super, super fast, but I also don't want to be trimming plants all the time either. So generally speaking, to summarize, we'll put root tabs in to start. We're using the Osmocote Plus DIY stuff. Check out the video of the DIY. I even put links in there so you can figure, okay, what do I need? Where do I buy it? That's what we use. If you didn't want to mess with that, then I would say the Easy Root Tabs by Aquarium Co-op, those are great. They're not expensive either. They're also gel capsule-like. I would say they're probably for the ones that are just, store-bought or internet-bought or whatever, those are probably the easier ones to use. And they do great too. So those would be my suggestions. Alphabet Grow, I'm going to be moving all of my fish, 150 plus, 10-hour drive, planning on 5-gallon buckets with sponge filters and a battery pack with air pumps. Any secondary recommendations? So first of all, good luck and congratulations. Hopefully that's the move that you want to make. So it'll be an exciting time. I did do a video on how to move with fish, right? So how to move a fish tank. You have 150 fish, which is quite a bit. Your plan is to do 5-gallon buckets, which is fine. You may have better luck. Instead of using 5-gallon buckets, consider using plastic totes. They make them in all different sizes. The larger ones are like the 27-gallon totes. The disadvantage there is they can get really heavy if you've got a lot of water in, but there's a big advantage to using these totes, and that is they're not so top heavy. All right, so if you're going to be driving for 10 hours and you're at all worried about those buckets, even with lids, if they tip over because you've got, maybe they're half filled with water. Yeah, they do have a tendency to tip. Where there's 2 advantages with the totes. One is obviously they're going to be flatter. They're not going to be as prone to tipping. In fact, they probably won't. Depending on how you secure them, you could stack them. You can drill a hole in the top and run your airline in there. I do recommend, I like your idea of using the air. Another thing to consider is sponge filters. That's awesome. I would make sure the sponge filters are fully cycled. And yeah, the fish are going to be a little stressed out because they're going to be bouncing around. 10-hour drive. The other recommendation that I would make is try not to feed them the day before. I would treat this as if you were shipping fish or packing them for a swap. When we pack fish for a swap, we don't feed them the day before because that cuts down on the amount of ammonia that's going to be produced that next day when they're in a bag. Now, your situation isn't as extreme because you're going to be running sponge filters. They're going to have air. The other thing that's nice about using a tote as opposed to a bucket is you've got more surface area, so better gas exchange. Right? I know you're going to have the sponge filter and they're blowing air in there anyway, but that will all make it a little bit easier. And once again, the fish, they still want the horizontal space as opposed to the vertical, just to spread out. When they're being moved like that, it's not like they're going to be swimming around like, oh, yeah, look at this. I'm in a completely dark tote swimming around. They're all going to go night-night. They're all going to be kind of huddled in a corner. But at least you have a little bit more area for them to spread out. Less likely, especially if you're moving any cichlids or fin nipper guys. Sometimes when they get stressed and scared and it's dark, they just start nipping just because they don't know what's coming at them. So that can help spread things out a little bit. Generally speaking, if I were moving those fish with a 10-hour drive, I would also have totes ready with fresh water. There is no advantage, zero advantage to using tank water in those, whatever you decide to use, those moving vessels. There's a lot of people think, okay, well, if I use the tank water, then that'll have beneficial bacteria. No, it doesn't. Right? Not enough to matter because the beneficial bacteria adhere to surfaces. They're not found, they're not motile, they're not planktonic, they're not in the water. So the only thing you'd be doing by using tank water is just being like, okay, now there's nitrate in the water. Well, that's not good. Exactly. So when we get ready for swaps, and I've documented this process in the past, is we'll take out big 27-gallon totes, put water in there, dechlorinate it, run an air stone at least just to make sure the water's ready, get it up to temperature. So in your case, you might have to run a heater just so that you're not shocking them. So you're not taking them out of a heated tank and putting them in cold water, right? So at least if they go from your tank to smaller totes, but you're using the larger tote to fill the smaller totes, if that makes any sense. Put the fish in there. Is the water temperature going to go down over 10 hours? No, maybe. But if you're moving soon, and you're in the United States, it's mostly warm, so maybe you're just not running the air conditioning as much, and you're basically trying to keep the water temperature about the same. You'll do fine. And then once you get to where you're going, the key is trying to get the tank set up. It's a pain, right? Moving fish is one reason why we're not moving out of here, not with 70 tanks, because that'd be a nightmare. All right, we'll take a couple more questions. Oh my gosh. Apparently when I'm by myself, I talk a lot more. I'm sorry about that. Take a couple more questions and then we'll call it a night because it's getting late. Bunny Viper, I knew you were the right professor for the job. Missing Joanna, putting together fun, first true nano. Her love and joy for the tinies is endearing and inspiring. Thank you both. Well, thank you so much. I'm sure she'll be glad to hear that. You know, what's weird is I'm surprised she hasn't popped in here in the chat, because I think she's probably watching. If not, she'll probably watch the replay. All right, let's see here. Matthew does stuff. Moving tanks is very bad as well. Oh, I agree with you. I absolutely agree. It is not a fun thing. We've moved a lot of tanks, and I've never been like, yeah, we're moving this tank. Yes, this is going to be a great day moving a tank. I don't care if it's a 10-gallon or a 100-gallon. It's never an enjoyable experience. All right, let's see here. I am going to go ahead and scroll around here looking for the thing. How to transfer fry to one tank to another. All night. How to transfer fry from one tank to another. A net. Right, and they go. I don't worry. So if basically you're like, okay, they're growing out of the tank that they're in, I need to move them from the 10-gallon grow out to a 30-gallon or whatever you're doing. I just catch them, throw them in a specimen container. You like the ones they have at the pet stores where they just kind of hang on the side. I usually have a few of those laying around the fish room. Hang them on the side, fill it with the tank water, catch them all in, dump them right in the tank that they're going to. I don't really spend a lot of, I'm not like especially like super careful with them. As long as they're not really tiny, that's all I do. Oink Master Supreme Forever, thank you so much for the super chat. Bought Baby Betta from Petco on Saturday, and he has a swollen belly. Try to pass stool this morning in a 2.5-gallon tank. Put back in cup. Feed peas in 3 days. yeah, so the bloat issue that you've got going on there, again, if the baby betta is eating, you're in the best possible situation. And when you see the bloat type stuff happening, the time to deal with it is when they're still consuming food, because there's a lot of options. You could try the peas. For me, I've never had the peas work. So I know it works in some cases. I'm not discounting people who've used peas. I'm like, yeah, it worked. It's never worked for me, but it doesn't mean it won't work for you. You could try that if they're going to eat it. If not, then your best bet, if they're still eating, is the medicated foods. They have medicated metronidazole flakes. That would probably be the way that I would go and see what happens there. All right, multi-tank addiction. It's been a while. Glad you're here. The little fecal matter chat, or the little sticker, fits in well with what we're talking about. Talked about a betta that's all bound up. Let him see the little sticker. Maybe that'll inspire him. Let's see here. I am scrolling on down. Yep, enjoyed the longer stream. Well, that's good to hear. I'm glad some people are like, all right, I'll hang with you. Turkey baster. Turkey baster for what? I use a turkey baster to move fry. Doesn't hurt them at all. Yeah, you can suck them up. They got to be pretty small, but I've used turkey basters on eggs for sure. So sometimes you'll have fish like the Geophagus topos, whenever they would lay eggs. I think at one point I actually showed that in a video where they had laid eggs on a rock, and I basically took a butter knife and I scraped the eggs off. And while I was doing that, I was sucking it up with the turkey baster, and the eggs were going right in the turkey baster. The trick is you got to kind of turn it and put your finger over the hole so they don't fall back out. And then I had an egg tumbler right in that same tank, and I would just squirt it right into the egg tumbler. And I got really good hatch rates doing that. You wouldn't think so. Like, wait a minute, you're telling me you used a knife to scrape the eggs off, suck them up with a turkey baster, squirted them right into the egg tumbler, and that worked? Yes, it did. I had hundreds of Geophagus topos fried doing it that way. So the stream has been going on for 100 minutes. Yeah, I think you're right about, well, now it's even longer. All right, let's do a couple more, and we'll call it a day. Adam says, treating ick. I raised temps and added salt 3 days before ick came in. Temp and salt made where there is no more sign of ick. Awesome. How long should I use the ick now? I would still use it, but you can stop the stuff that you're doing. I usually try to wait at least 7 days from the last time I see the last spot. All right, so I see the last spot. I'm still treating with the meds. I'm still keeping the temperatures raised. I still got the salt concentrations at therapeutic levels. I'm waiting 7 days. Sometimes it was a bad case, or if the fish are maybe a little bit more valuable, I might go out to 10 days. And then what I do is, it's not like I'm like, okay, let me put the carbon in, let me do this, let me do that. What I do then after that 7 to 10 days, after, it's been 7 or 10 days, I haven't seen a spot, they're acting normal, they're eating, I will slowly lower the temperature. So if I was at 78 and I kicked it up to 83, 84, then over the next couple days, I'm going to bring that back down to 78. I'm not immediately being like, I got to do 100% water change to get the salt and the meds out. I just don't do that. What I generally do is I'm like, okay, I'm going to do my normal, whatever it is on that tank. So if it's a 25% water change, I do my 25% water change. I just know I'm not adding in any more meds. By the way, with ICX, again, that stuff is light sensitive. So the active ingredient in the ICX is going to break down anyway, just in the tank. So I'm doing my 25% water changes. It's slowly lowering the salt concentrations back down again. Again, I don't want to go extreme. I don't want to go from, there was very little osmotic pressure. Maybe you had 0.9% sodium chloride in there, and now you're kicking it at a tablespoon per 3 gallons on the extreme side of things, and now I'm right back down. So I just one of these huge spikes and back down. I'm not doing that. I'm just, as I do water changes weekly, that salt concentration is coming down and down and down and lower and lower and lower until it gets back to normal over the course of a month or so. So I'm not trying to shock my fish. If that works for me, it does pretty well. So, all right, one more. Let's see what we got here. Melissa says, I bought a 125 gallon. I already have 2 canister filters for a 75 and a 55 gallon tanks. Can I use them, or do I need more appropriate size canisters? Well, great question. Depends on what your canister filters are. If they're rated for a 75 and a 55, they're probably, at least in terms of mechanical filtration. Biological, I will maintain that's more than enough for the biological. So making sure that the ammonia nitrite situation is dealt with, even for a normally stocked 125. The issue is going to be water flow. and how much mechanical filtration are those canister filters going to supply to a 6-foot tank. Unless it's like, oh, I got the big bad fluval, and it's overpowered for the 75, that's a different story. But if they're rated for those tanks, I might consider getting a canister filter that's properly rated for 125 gallon, but then just transfer the media from one of those filters into that 125 canister filter. And that would be the way I would do it. Snowball, do I have firemouth cichlids? Not currently, but I do have Thrychtes maculopinnis, which is the same genus. They look almost just like firemouths. They just don't get they don't flare their gills out. They don't have the same amount of color. They have a different color. I like them every bit as much, but I don't have the firemouths right now. I have the maculopinnis. All right, everybody. I think we're going to call it a night. I'm pretty sure we got close to a record live stream, almost 2 hours, which is pretty cool. Thank you for hanging out with me and putting up with me without Joanna here. I am expecting she's going to be back next week because that'll be the live stream right before Aquasella. So I hope to see you. Again, we got the rare fish auction on Sunday. If you're willing to and around the area, come on out and enjoy that. But I hope you have a great week. Thank you for being the most awesome people on the face of the earth, because you are. And we'll see you next week. Have a wonderful weekend.